On the night of December 10, 1965, a Greek shipping magnate named Stavros Niarchos boarded a private plane in Canada. On a second plane, a Ford Motor Company jet lent for the occasion, a 24-year-old American heiress named Charlotte Ford took off from New York with her lawyer. Both aircraft were bound for the same small dirt streets border town, Ciudad Juárez, Mexico. A Mexican judge was waiting in a new motel suite at the edge of town. He had been asked to perform a wedding. The complication was that Niarchos, 56 years old, was already married. He was, in fact, on the third marriage of his life, to a woman named Eugenie Livanos, the mother of his 4 children. Eugenie was at that moment in Switzerland, at her husband's chalet in St. Moritz, with the children, the staff, and no idea that her husband had been quietly arranging a Mexican divorce for the previous several weeks. The divorce was granted in Juárez. A few hours later, in the same hotel suite, with a Boeing 707 chartered from BOAC waiting on a Nassau tarmac to fly the newlyweds to Zurich, the judge married Charlotte Ford to Stavros Niarchos. When the couple arrived in St. Moritz that night, they did not go to the chalet. They could not. The former Mrs. Niarchos was still inside it, along with her 4 children, and the news of the remarriage had not yet officially reached any of them. Charlotte and Stavros checked into a hotel instead. The pregnancy she would soon be carrying had likely already begun. 2 weeks later, on the afternoon of December 28, Charlotte's younger sister, Anne, 22, married a handsome Italian stockbroker named Giancarlo Uzielli in a civil ceremony held in the Ford family's Fifth Avenue apartment in Manhattan. No photographs were permitted. The bride changed clothes between the ceremony and the reception. Her father, Henry Ford II, had flown in from Detroit for the afternoon. He was there with his Italian second wife, Christina, whom he had married 10 months earlier, after divorcing the girl's mother the previous year in Idaho. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. In the space of 14 days, the 2 daughters of the most powerful industrialist in America were both suddenly married. Charlotte to one of the richest men in the world, and to a Florentine who had been loaned money by his father to buy a seat on the New York Stock Exchange. Their mother had divorced their father. Their father had remarried. Their great-grandfather, the man whose name they carried, had died before they were old enough to remember him. The newspapers called it the most talked-about fortnight in American society for a generation. The press would call it many other things over the coming 30 years, and almost none of them would be flattering. This is the story of Charlotte and Anne Ford, the auto empire's most photographed daughters, the girls whose debut parties were the most expensive in American history, the sisters whose marriages played out in tabloid headlines from Paris to Palm Beach. It is the story of bad husbands, worse husbands, and one husband who was ultimately charged with insider trading by the Securities and Exchange Commission. It is also, in the end, a story about what happens to heiresses who were supposed to lose everything and somehow didn't. The house that Henry built. To understand the Ford sisters, you have to understand the peculiar weight they carried from birth. Their surname was one of the most famous words in the English-speaking world. It was stamped on the front of more vehicles than any other name in human history. When Charlotte and Anne were born, there were more Fords on the roads of America than there were houses on most streets. The man who had made this possible was dead before either of them could speak. Henry Ford I, the founder of the Ford Motor Company, had been born in 1863 on a farm in Dearborn, Michigan, to Irish immigrant parents. He was a terrible farmer and a brilliant mechanic. In 1903, at the age of 40, he and a handful of investors founded a small car company. 5 years later, he introduced the Model T. The world, quite literally, changed shape around him. By the time he died in 1947, the company was one of the largest industrial enterprises on the planet. He had also become one of the most controversial men in America. He published anti-Semitic tracts. He fought unions with a private security force that beat labor organizers bloody on the overpasses of his River Rouge plant. He was a genius. He was also, by all accounts, a difficult man to love. His only son, Edsel, had tried. Edsel Ford was by every measure the opposite of his father. Refined, collaborative, a lover of art and design. He tried, for most of his adult life, to modernize his father's company, and his father fought him at nearly every turn. In 1943, Edsel died of stomach cancer at the age of 49. Family members, and many historians, believe the stress of working for his father contributed to his illness. Edsel left 4 children. The eldest, born in 1917, was named Henry Ford II. He was 26 years old when his father died and serving on active duty in the Navy. The old man, Henry Ford I, was in his 80s and in obvious cognitive decline. The company he had built was, astonishingly, losing money. Its accounts were reportedly kept in such disarray that bills were weighed rather than counted. The federal government, in the middle of a world war, became genuinely concerned that Ford Motor Company might collapse. In 1945, the Navy released young Henry Ford II from active duty specifically so he could return to Detroit and take over. He was 28 years old. He had never run a company in his life. Within a decade, he had saved it. He took it public in 1956. He funded the effort that beat Ferrari at Le Mans in 1966, the campaign dramatized in the film Ford v. Ferrari. By the time his daughters were coming of age, Henry Ford II was not merely wealthy. He was, in a very specific American sense, royalty. People called him, behind his back and sometimes to his face, Hank the Deuce. The daughters in question were also called something. They were called, at first in Detroit and then in New York and then in every magazine that covered the social season, the Ford Girls. And McDonnell's Revenge. Before there were Ford Girls, there was a Ford wedding. It took place on July 13, 1940, at the McDonnell family estate in Southampton on Long Island. The bride was Anne McDonnell, a dark-haired beauty of Irish Catholic stock. The groom was Henry Ford II, a Protestant from Detroit who had agreed, as a condition of the marriage, to convert to Catholicism. The McDonnells were one of the great Catholic families of the East Coast. Anne's father was a prominent financier. The family occupied a Georgian mansion with 50 rooms. They had their own chapel. They summered in Southampton and wintered in New York. In the caste system of American Catholic aristocracy, they were at the very top. The wedding was enormous. 1,500 guests. It was said at the time to be one of the largest weddings ever held in America. Photographs show Henry, thin and tuxedoed, looking slightly overwhelmed. And, in white lace, looking entirely composed. They had 3 children in quick succession. Charlotte, born April 3, 1941, and born in 1943. Edsel Bryant Ford II, born in 1948. They divided their time between a house in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, and the McDonnell estate on Long Island, where the children spent their summers. For the first 15 years of the marriage, the public image held. Henry and Anne Ford were photographed at charity balls, at hospital openings, at state dinners in Washington, and was considered one of the best-dressed women in America. Henry was considered one of the most important. Their daughters appeared in magazines wearing matching smocked dresses. Behind the photographs, the marriage was deteriorating. Henry drank heavily. He worked late. He traveled to Europe frequently and brought back stories about people he had met in Paris and London and Rome. In 1960, he met one of those people in person. Her name was Christina Vettor Austin. She was a 31-year-old Italian divorcee at a party at Maxim's. She was striking. She was unmarried. She was, in the view of anyone who watched Henry Ford II that night, exactly the kind of person who could make a 43-year-old American industrialist forget that he had a wife and 3 children waiting for him in Detroit. For 5 years, the affair was kept quiet from almost everyone, including Anne Ford. In 1964, Anne obtained a divorce in Idaho, a state favored for its short residency requirements, and Henry Ford II was legally free. He married Christina Vettor in February of 1965. Grosse Pointe. Charlotte and Ford grew up in a suburb of Detroit called Grosse Pointe, which in the 1940s and 1950s was one of the most segregated, wealthy, and carefully manicured enclaves in the United States. The Ford family was not the only auto dynasty there. The Dodges were there. The Fishers were there. The Firestones, for tire-related reasons, were there. The lawns were vast. The houses had names. The country clubs were called the Country Club of Detroit and the Grosse Pointe Club, and the Country Club of Detroit again, because what Grosse Pointe lacked in inventiveness it made up for in repetition. The Ford girls attended the country day school. They went to Mass on Sundays. They had a father who was absent much of the time and a mother who was present almost all of it. They were raised, first and foremost, to be Catholic. And McDonnell Ford made sure of it. Both girls were sent to the convent of the Sacred Heart in Norriton, Connecticut, a Catholic boarding school for daughters of the very rich. They sang hymns. They wore uniforms. The Sacred Heart schools had a reputation, then as now, for producing graceful young women who were also unflinchingly polite. From Norriton, Charlotte went to Le Fleuron, a finishing school in Florence, where young American heiresses were taught languages, art history, and the proper way to eat an artichoke. From Le Fleuron, she went briefly to the Sorbonne in Paris, and followed a similar path. They were being trained, in a manner that had not materially changed since the Edith Wharton novels of the late 1800s, to become the wives of men who might one day need a well-dressed hostess at a formal dinner in Mayfair. They were not being trained to run companies. When a reporter asked Charlotte, later in life, whether she had ever wanted a job at Ford Motor Company, she gave a famously blunt answer. "I have no desire to be on the board of Ford Motor Company. Anyway, I was born a girl and that takes care of that." In the Ford family of the 1950s, daughters were raised to marry. Sons were raised to run the company. Charlotte and Anne were sent to Paris to learn French. Neither of them, it should be said, was particularly academic. They were pretty. They were charming. They were extremely well-dressed. They were, above all, Fords, which meant that the world was going to pay attention to them whether they wanted it to or not. The party of the century. On the evening of December 21, 1959, with snow falling over the suburbs of Detroit, more than 1,000 guests arrived at the Country Club of Detroit in Grosse Pointe Farms for Charlotte Ford's debut. The papers had been covering the preparations for months. A Parisian decorator named Jacques Frank had been flown in to transform the ballroom into what the society pages would describe as an 18th-century French drawing room, with candles, firelight, and fresh flowers imported from the south of France. The total cost of the evening was reported, at the time, to be approximately $250,000. In today's money, roughly $2.5 million. For a single party. Charlotte wore a gown designed by Yves Saint Laurent at the House of Dior. It was white satin, strapless, ankle-length in front, sweeping into a train behind. The bodice was embroidered with pink tourmalines and pearls. She wore long white kid gloves and white orchids. 3 bands played. The Meyer Davis Orchestra, imported from New York, performed in the main ballroom. And in the main event, Nat King Cole, flown in from California for the occasion, sang for the guests, none of whom could quite believe they were watching Nat King Cole sing at a debutante party in a Detroit suburb. The guest list read like a cross-section of the American plutocracy. Gary Cooper and his wife attended. They were house guests of the Fords. Sir Charles Churchill, a cousin of Winston Churchill, was there. Paul Louis Weyler, the French industrialist, flew in from Paris. Representatives of the Rockefeller, Mellon, and Whitney families attended. An entire section of the Detroit Country Club was reserved for the out-of-town guests, who numbered more than 100. Charlotte stood in the receiving line for 2 hours, greeting each guest by name. She was 18 years old. The Los Angeles Times correspondent, filing his copy at 3 in the morning, called it probably the social event of the decade in the Mideastern United States. The phrase "party of the century" would attach itself to the Charlotte Ford debut and stay there, semi-permanently, for the next 60 years. The party made Charlotte a public figure overnight. She was photographed leaving the country club. She was photographed arriving at the airport. She was photographed in Paris and London and New York. Within weeks, she was being identified in print as automobile heiress Charlotte Ford. She was not yet a debutante in the traditional sense. She was a celebrity. It was a slightly different thing, and the distinction would matter enormously over the next several decades. 2 years later, and Ford would have her debut. And the family would outdo itself again. Ella Fitzgerald and the Rain, June of 1961. And Ford was 17. Her mother and McDonnell Ford had been planning the younger daughter's debutante party for more than a year. Jacques Frank, the same Parisian decorator who had done Charlotte's ball, was engaged again, this time to turn the Ford family estate in Grosse Pointe Farms into a full-scale recreation of the palace at Versailles. A vast turquoise-colored pavilion was erected on the lawn. Fountains were installed. Trees were imported and replanted. And the entertainment this time was Ella Fitzgerald. According to Time magazine, which covered the event the following week, the evening's only disaster was the weather. A heavy summer rainstorm arrived without warning and soaked through the pavilion's turquoise roof. Guests in black tie and silk moved indoors as their shoes squelched across the Ford lawn. Ella Fitzgerald sang anyway. The party continued until nearly dawn. Time called it, cautiously, the new candidate for the title of Party of the Century. And Ford's debut was also extraordinary for a reason the society columns did not report at the time. According to a long Detroit Free Press retrospective published decades later, it was on the night before her younger daughter's debutante ball that and McDonnell Ford learned, for the first time, that her husband was in love with another woman. Christina Vettor Austin's name had been circulating quietly among Henry Ford II's social circle for some months, and McDonnell Ford had heard nothing. And then, on the eve of her daughter's long-planned debut, she was told, not only that the affair was happening, but that Henry intended to marry Christina. She went ahead with the party anyway. She stood in the receiving line in a gown fitted for the occasion. She embraced her husband for photographs. She smiled at her daughter's friends. She said nothing to the press, and very little to anyone outside her closest friends. 3 years later, in Idaho, she would finally take the divorce. For Anne and Charlotte, the shift happened quietly at first. Their mother, the first Mrs. Ford, moved with them to a large apartment on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. Their father remained in Detroit, initially alone, later with Christina. The girls spent holidays shuttling between parents. Charlotte took a job with a New York decorator and enrolled in courses at a Manhattan institute. They appeared, both of them, on the list of America's 10 best-dressed women. They wore correges. They had the right handbags. They knew the right maitre d's. They were 21 and 19 years old, with a last name that functioned as a kind of universal invitation. It is hard, from the distance of 60 years, to convey quite how famous the Ford sisters were in the first half of the 1960s. They were not movie stars. They had no particular talent to display. They had done nothing in particular to earn their celebrity. But their photographs appeared in every magazine that photographed beautiful people. They were friends with Jackie Kennedy. Charlotte, her sister would later recall, dated Frank Sinatra for a while. They were, in short, precisely the sort of young women who would attract the attention of a man like Stavros Niarchos, the Greek. Stavros Spiros Niarchos had been born in 1909 in the rural southern Greek region of Laconia. He studied law at the University of Athens. He did not practice. He entered his uncle's flour milling business and then realized, with the clarity of a man born to shipping, that the real money was in moving grain rather than grinding it. By the age of 30, he had built up a small merchant fleet. By the age of 40, after the Second World War and a shrewdly negotiated purchase of surplus American Liberty ships, he had built the largest privately owned shipping fleet on Earth. He was also one of the most competitive men alive, primarily because of his lifelong rivalry with another Greek shipping magnate, Aristotle Onassis, whom he hated openly and relentlessly. By 1964, Niarchos was 55 years old, handsome, silver-haired, and on his third marriage. His first wife had lasted 1 year in 1930. His second, from 1939 until 1947. His third wife was Eugenie Livanos, daughter of another Greek shipping magnate. Eugenie had borne him 4 children. Her sister, Athina, universally known as Tina, had been briefly the wife of Aristotle Onassis. The Greek shipping dynasties of the 20th century were more closely intermarried than most European royal houses. In the summer of 1964, Niarchos was cruising the Mediterranean aboard his 3-masted schooner Creole, at the time the largest privately owned sailing yacht in the world. The Ford family was also cruising the Mediterranean that summer, aboard their yacht Santa Maria. Both vessels put in at the small French port of Villefranche-sur-Mer. According to the later reporting of the columnist Susie Knickerbocker, Niarchos saw Charlotte Ford at a distance, aboard the Santa Maria, and decided he wanted to meet her. Within days, his launch was running a daily shuttle between the 2 yachts. By the end of the week, the Creole was trailing the Santa Maria from port to port across the Mediterranean. Niarchos was, by all accounts, devastatingly charming when he wanted to be. He spoke 4 languages. He collected impressionist paintings. He owned an entire private island off the coast of Greece called Spetsopoula. His personal fortune was estimated at over $200 million. He was also still married. Charlotte was 23. Her parents were mid-divorce. She had spent her adolescence watching her father conduct an affair with a woman she did not like. She had developed, by that point, certain ideas about what was acceptable and what was not, and those ideas did not necessarily align with the ideas her mother had tried to give her at the Sacred Heart. By the end of the summer, she had informed her parents that she intended to marry Stavros Niarchos as soon as he could extract himself from his third marriage. Her father, on being told, was reportedly unenthusiastic. Her mother, on being told, was reportedly worse than unenthusiastic. But the Fords, in the memorable phrase of one family member quoted in Time magazine, were not worried about whether the marriage would happen. They were worried about the finesse required in handling it. Niarchos obtained his Mexican divorce from Eugenie in early December 1965. On December 10th, he married Charlotte in the Juárez Motel suite described at the beginning of this story. The BOAC Boeing 707 chartered for the post-wedding flight to Zurich was reported to have cost approximately $40,000 for the one-way trip, which, given that this is how the groom treated his bride's travel arrangements, suggested he was not worried about the cost of the wedding. The press did not catch the story until the following day. The columnist Susie, of New York, broke it first. By nightfall, it was on the front page of every paper in America. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Juárez Suite. In the aftermath of the wedding, Charlotte Niarchos, as she was now known, was flown from Juárez to Nassau on a Ford Motor Company jet. From Nassau, she boarded her new husband's chartered Boeing 707 for Zurich. From Zurich, they took Niarchos's private Learjet to St. Moritz. When they landed in St. Moritz, they did not go to his chalet, because Eugenie Livanos, the former Mrs. Niarchos of perhaps 6 days standing, was still inside it with the couple's 4 children, some of whom were older than Charlotte. The new Mr. and Mrs. Niarchos checked into a hotel in the town. Charlotte could not ski, the papers noted, because she was already visibly pregnant. Niarchos left her alone in the hotel for long stretches while he visited Eugenie and the children in the chalet. She was 24 years old. It was her honeymoon. She was pregnant by a man 32 years her senior who had, for the previous decade and a half, been married to a woman who was still, apparently, present enough in his life to warrant daily visits. If she registered this as a warning sign, she did not say so in any interview she ever gave. Their daughter, Elena and Ford Niarchos, was born in New York City on May 25, 1966. Charlotte had returned to the United States for the birth. Niarchos arrived shortly afterward, stayed briefly, and left again. By the autumn of 1966, the marriage was effectively over. Friends told reporters that Charlotte had realized very quickly that she had married a man who had no particular interest in being married. By March 1967, 15 months after the Juárez ceremony, Charlotte was back in Juárez, in a different motel, obtaining a divorce. She asked for and was granted sole custody of Elena. Niarchos did not contest. The terms of the financial settlement were never publicly disclosed. The more significant detail, as it would eventually emerge, concerned Elena. Under Greek law, which governed Niarchos' estate, a child born of a marriage annulled in Greece did not automatically inherit from her father. Decades later, after Niarchos' death in 1996, Elena would discover that her father's will did not mention her at all. She would sue for a share of the fortune. In 1997, a Greek court would rule that while she was indeed Niarchos' biological daughter, she had no legal claim on his estate. She received nothing from him. Elena, for the record, did not lose everything either. She is presently the Chief Customer Experience Officer of Ford Motor Company, a senior executive in her own right. But in 1967, when her parents' marriage formally ended, she was 9 months old, and her mother was 25, and the tabloids of 2 continents had already decided that the Ford-Niarchos wedding was the most spectacular social implosion since the assassination of the previous decade's glamour. Charlotte had been, for 15 months, the toast of Europe. She was now a single mother in a Fifth Avenue apartment, divorced at 25, and the subject of more press coverage than any 25-year-old in America. Johnny. And Ford's wedding, 2 weeks after her sister's, was quieter in every way. Giancarlo Uzielli, universally called Johnny, was a 31-year-old Italian stockbroker who had moved to New York 22 years earlier, as a child, when his family left Florence before the Second World War. His father was prominent enough to have bought his son a seat on the New York Stock Exchange in 1962 for approximately $175,000. Johnny was handsome, well-educated, well-mannered, and, importantly, not a Greek shipping magnate. He was also, like Niarchos, a divorced man whose previous marriage had not yet been formally annulled. The elder Fords were reportedly not overjoyed. The ceremony took place in the Ford family's Fifth Avenue apartment on the afternoon of December 28, 1965. It was a civil ceremony. The Associated Press photographer was permitted to take pictures of Anne and Johnny in the hallway afterward, but no pictures of the ceremony itself. The reception was held the night before the wedding at the top of the RCA building, an arrangement which, for anyone who has ever planned a wedding, is a puzzling sequence but not an unprecedented one in jet-set Manhattan of the 1960s. Their first child, a son named Alessandro Ford Uzielli, was born less than a year later, in November of 1966. Johnny and Anne lived in New York. They traveled in the same circles Charlotte did. They were photographed at parties. They went to dinner at Sardi's. They were, to all appearances, a happy and handsome young couple who had avoided the Juárez Motel version of marriage in favor of something quieter, more Italian, and therefore, the press assumed, more durable. This assumption turned out to be optimistic. Spetsopoula. On the morning of May 4, 1970, the housekeeping staff on the Greek island of Spetsopoula discovered that Eugenie Livanos Niarchos, Stavros Niarchos' third wife, the woman Charlotte Ford had married him away from 5 years earlier, was dead in her bedroom. The official cause of death was an overdose of barbiturates. Eugenie was 43 years old. Her husband, Stavros, was in the house at the time. The investigation that followed was brief. A coroner was dispatched from Athens. An inquiry was opened and, in short order, closed. Stavros Niarchos was officially exonerated. Eugenie was buried in the Niarchos family tomb in Lausanne, Switzerland. Almost no one outside of official Greek circles believed the story. Eugenie's body was reported to have borne injuries that were difficult to square with a simple barbiturate overdose. The initial coroner was said, in accounts published years later, to have refused to sign the death certificate. Her brother did not accept the finding. The Onassis family, long-standing rivals of Niarchos, certainly did not accept it. The only major family that did accept the official finding was her own, the Livanos, and 1 year and 5 months after Eugenie's death, her younger sister Athina, the former wife of Aristotle Onassis, married Stavros Niarchos in Paris. She became, in October 1971, his fourth wife. In 1974, she also died of an overdose. She was 45. None of this had any direct effect on Charlotte Ford. She was 28 years old, divorced, the mother of a 4-year-old daughter, living in Manhattan. She had not spoken publicly about her ex-husband in several years and would rarely do so for the rest of her life. She was, by any reasonable measure, lucky. She had married a man, lived with him for 15 months, had a daughter with him, and left. Eugenie Livanos had married him and stayed. For Charlotte Ford, the Niarchos chapter closed in 1967. For Eugenie Livanos Niarchos, it closed in 1970 on a Greek island. The difference between those two outcomes is one of the hardest things to read about in the entire history of the Ford sisters. It is also, for Charlotte, almost certainly the thing that kept her from losing anything worse than a few years. Hank the Deuce Unravels. While his daughters were being married off, divorcing, and appearing in magazines, Henry Ford II was embarking on what would become, in the mid-1970s, the most publicly embarrassing period of his life. His second marriage to Christina Vettor had lasted well in the beginning. Christina was, by all accounts, stylish, international, and energetic. Life magazine, in 1966, called her a highly effective ambassadress for the Ford Motor Company. She was named to the International Best Dressed list. She traveled constantly. She befriended Imelda Marcos, which, in retrospect, should have been a warning sign about her taste in companions. In 1969, at a Detroit auto show, Henry Ford II met an 18-year-old model from Cass Tech High School named Kathleen Juárez. She was a divorcee, with 2 small daughters of her own, supporting them by working as a hand model. Her husband had been killed in a car accident in 1959, 2 hours before their second daughter was born. She was raising the girls alone. Henry Ford II was 52 years old and had been married to Christina for 4 years. By the mid-1970s, Henry and Kathleen were appearing together openly. On the night of February 10, 1975, a California Highway Patrol officer pulled over a 1975 Lincoln Continental Mark IV on the Pacific Coast Highway near Santa Barbara. The driver was Henry Ford II. He was visibly drunk. Sitting in the passenger seat was Kathleen Juárez. The arrest made the front page of every newspaper in the country. Henry Ford II, chairman of the Ford Motor Company, had been arrested for driving under the influence in the middle of the night on a California highway with a woman who was not his wife. When reporters asked him about the arrest the following week, he said 6 words that have since entered the general lexicon of American corporate life. Never complain. Never explain. The line became famous. It remains, to this day, one of the most quoted one-liners ever produced by an American chief executive. It is also, when you look closely at it, the philosophy of a man who has given up defending his own behavior and has decided to simply keep behaving that way. Christina filed for divorce in 1980. In 1980, 3 months after the Christina divorce was final, Henry Ford II married Kathleen Juárez in Carson City, Nevada. Neither Charlotte nor Edsel II attended. The daughters had been close to Christina in a way they had never been close to Kathy, a development their mother, and McDonnell Ford, might have found bleakly amusing. A few nights after the Nevada wedding, according to the biographer Robert Lacey, who published a definitive family history some years later, Henry Ford II called his daughter and from Europe, in the middle of the night, drunk, and screamed obscenities at her over the telephone, and is said to have barely spoken to her father for the remainder of his life. He died on September 29, 1987, of pneumonia, at Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit. He was 70. He had reportedly spent many of his final months in his private office shredding personal documents. Whatever he did not want to be remembered, he destroyed. Anne's quiet collapse, and the daughter who changed everything. And Ford Uzieli's marriage to Johnny had produced a son, Alessandro, in 1966. In 1973, it produced a daughter, Allegra. Allegra was, by all accounts, an adored child. She was also, by the age of 3, a child who was clearly not developing the way her older brother had developed. She did not speak the way other children spoke. She did not process sounds the way other children processed sounds. In 1976, a doctor told Ford, with the brutality that was then standard in these conversations, that her daughter had learning disabilities so severe that and should consider institutionalizing her. This was a piece of advice that, in the mid-1970s, a great many doctors still gave to a great many parents. And Ford, to the degree that she is remembered at all in public life, is remembered because she refused to take it. She hired specialists. She read the literature. She moved Allegra through a series of schools. She spent years, and an undisclosed but substantial sum of money, trying to understand what was happening in her daughter's brain and how to help her thrive. In 1974, a year before the Juárez arrest that would embarrass her father, and filed for divorce from Johnny Uzieli. She never remarried. Instead, in 1989, she became the chairwoman of the National Center for Learning Disabilities. She served in that position until 2001. Under her leadership, the NCLD expanded from a small grant-making foundation into a national organization with a Washington office, an advocacy program, and a platform for working with federal policy. In 2003, she published a book called Laughing Allegra, the inspiring story of a mother's struggle and triumph raising a daughter with learning disabilities. She wrote it with her daughter's explicit permission. It became a standard reference for families with children like Allegra, of which there turned out to be far more than the doctors of the 1970s had admitted. Allegra Ford Thomas is, as of this writing, a married woman in her 50s. She runs a small business. She has lived, for the last 30 years, something close to an ordinary adult life, which is the single most improbable outcome anyone in the room with her in 1976 would have predicted. And Ford, the daughter of a billionaire, the great-granddaughter of the most famous industrialist in American history, the sister of the most photographed debutante of her generation, did not particularly want to be known for being any of those things. She wanted to be known for the 3 decades of advocacy work that ran from Allegra's diagnosis through the end of the century. She largely succeeded. Her name, today, appears in very few society columns. It appears in a great many special education curricula. She was, by her own later description, the quiet sister. Charlotte's 3 more acts. Charlotte Ford's life did not slow down after the Niarchos divorce. It merely stopped being quite as spectacular. In 1970, she played a small role, a receptionist, in the film Love Story, starring Ryan O'Neal. It was a lark. She was not pursuing an acting career. She was simply in the right Park Avenue apartment at the right moment, and the producers thought it was amusing to put a Ford heiress behind a receptionist's desk for 30 seconds. She never acted again. In 1973, she married the financier J. Anthony Forstmann, known to everyone as Tony. He was the brother of the billionaire private equity investor Teddy Forstmann, who would later become, among other things, Padma Lakshmi's boyfriend and a fixture of the 1990s Wall Street landscape. Tony was handsome, charming, steady, and, most importantly, not Stavros Niarchos. The marriage lasted, on paper, for about a decade. It was, by all accounts, reasonably quiet. In the late 1970s, Charlotte launched a line of clothing called the Charlotte Ford Collection, aimed at working women. She was 37 years old and making her own money. In 1986, she married again. The new husband was Edward Reynolds Down Jr., a publishing executive who had, at various points, owned Ladies' Home Journal, Family Weekly, and American Home. He had sold his company for approximately $9 million in the mid-1970s and was, by 1986, a wealthy Southampton socialite with a seat on the board of Bear Stearns. For several years, the marriage was calm. Down was older, established, respectable. He had a townhouse in Manhattan and a house in Southampton. Charlotte settled into a life that looked, to the outside world, as close to stable as her life had ever been. In June of 1992, Edward Down was charged by the Securities and Exchange Commission with insider trading. The scheme, as the SEC described it, involved Down trading on advance information about corporate mergers, takeovers, and leveraged buyouts, using his positions on the boards of Bear Stearns and Kidde Incorporated as sources of the inside tips. The total illegal profits were estimated at approximately $13 million. Other defendants included a Revlon Cosmetics heir, a Los Angeles real estate investor, a Bermuda-based business partner, and a broker at Oppenheimer and Company who had handled Down's personal account. Down pleaded guilty in September 1993 to 2 felony charges: wire fraud and tax violations. He was sentenced to 3,000 hours of community service. In a separate civil settlement the following year, he agreed to pay a total of approximately $11 million, which reportedly left him with very little beyond his personal belongings. Charlotte, by that point, had filed for divorce. In January of 2001, in the final hours of Bill Clinton's presidency, Edward Down received a presidential pardon. It emerged later that Senator Chris Dodd of Connecticut, a friend of Down's, had personally lobbied the Clinton White House on his behalf. The pardon was included in the same batch that produced the much more infamous Mark Rich pardon. Charlotte did not remarry. The third act of her romantic life had, in the end, concluded with her third husband being officially pardoned for crimes her second husband would have found beneath his tax bracket. The will. When Henry Ford II died in September 1987, his estate was valued at approximately $350 million. He divided it among his widow, Kathleen Duras Ford, and his 3 children, Charlotte, Anne, and Edsel Bryant Ford II. A portion was also set aside for his grandchildren. Kathleen was granted, under the terms of the will, at least $1.5 million a year from a trust, contingent on the approval of the trustees. The contingency turned out to matter. Within a few years of Henry's death, Kathleen filed a lawsuit against her stepson, Edsel II, serving as a trustee, accusing him and the other trustees of withholding her share. The dispute was long, bitter, and entirely predictable. The children had not attended her 1980 wedding to their father. They had not warmed to her in the 7 years of marriage that followed. The matter was eventually settled. Kathleen Ford lived out her life in Henry Ford II's Grosse Pointe house and died in 2020 at the age of 80. The 3 children received approximately what the will had said they would receive. None of them lost their shares. The Ford family's Special Class B stock, which has permanently guaranteed the family's voting control of Ford Motor Company, remained with them. It remains with them still. They did not lose everything. Not even close. By any ordinary standard, each of the 3 children of Henry Ford II died, or will die, among the wealthiest several hundred people in America. This is, in one sense, the punchline of the Ford sisters' story. They were not Barbara Hutton. They were not Alfred Gwynn Vanderbilt. Nobody gave away their entire fortune. Nobody renounced their citizenship. Nobody ended up in a hotel suite with $3,500 in a bank account and 10 people at their funeral. They took their share. They kept it. What they lost, if they lost anything, was time. They lost, in each case, a decade or so of their 20s to men who were not worth the years they consumed. The etiquette author and the advocate. In 1988, Charlotte Ford published a book titled Charlotte Ford's Book of Modern Manners. It became an instant bestseller. It was reissued, updated, and reprinted continuously for the next 2 decades. In 2001, she published a follow-up, 21st Century Etiquette, which also became a bestseller. She was, by then, in her early 60s. The irony of her having become America's leading authority on etiquette was not lost on anyone, including Charlotte herself. She had been married 3 times. One of those marriages had begun in a Juárez motel room with her husband's previous wife a few time zones away. Another had ended in an SEC insider trading prosecution. She was, objectively, an unlikely candidate to tell the country which fork to use. But there was something else going on. Charlotte had spent her entire adult life in rooms where behavior mattered. She had been raised by nuns who cared intensely about etiquette. She had trained at Le Fleuron in Florence. She had been presented to society in a Saint Laurent gown embroidered with tourmalines. And she had, across the 3 marriages, watched 3 different versions of what happened when people in those rooms stopped behaving themselves. She had opinions. The opinions were, on the whole, sensible. Treat waiters the way you would treat bishops. Thank your hosts. Do not gossip within earshot of children. Write the thank you note. Marry whom you love, but do not marry for whom you marry. It will end badly either way. Her books sold steadily for 30 years. At the same time, she continued her work at the institution that is now called New York Presbyterian Hospital. She joined as a governor in 1979. When New York Hospital and Presbyterian Hospital merged in 1998, she became a trustee. She eventually became the first woman to serve as vice chair of the hospital's board. In 2023, she was named a life trustee. She had served quietly and continuously for more than 40 years. Very few people outside the hospital's senior leadership knew the depth of her involvement. Her sister, and by that same point, had been running the National Center for Learning Disabilities, had written a book about raising Allegra, and was, at least within the world of families affected by learning disabilities, a well-known and beloved figure. She did not do interviews about her father or her first husband or the night in 1961 when she learned that her father was leaving her mother. If you asked her, she would redirect you to Allegra. The Ford sisters, in their late decades, were extremely polite women. They were polite because they had been trained to be polite, and because politeness had come to seem, to both of them, like the single most useful tool a woman could carry into a world that was going to treat her name as public property for as long as she had it. The end of the line. On the afternoon of December 21, 2025, in her Manhattan home, Charlotte Ford died. She was 84. The obituary in the Detroit News, published 2 days later, was dignified and relatively short. It described her debut, her 3 marriages, her career as an author, her service on the hospital board. It noted that she was survived by her daughter Elena, her sister and, her brother Edsel too, 4 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. Charlotte's obituary did not mention the Juárez Motel suite. It did not mention Eugenie Livanos. It did not mention Edward Downs' insider trading case, or the Clinton pardon, or the Kathleen Duras lawsuit, or the night her father called her sister from Europe at 3 in the morning. It mentioned Nat King Cole singing at her debut in Grosse Pointe. It mentioned that she had been, by the end, the vice chair of the best hospital in New York. It said that her greatest joys were her family and her friends, and that her obituary writers, her family, would remember her for her warmth, elegance, and unwavering devotion to those she loved. Her great-grandfather had died in 1947. Her grandfather, Edsel, had died in 1943, 2 years before she was born. Her father had died in 1987. Her sister, as of this writing, is still alive, still running her foundation, still quietly raising money for a condition that her youngest child's disability forced her to spend her life understanding. The Ford sisters' story is not, finally, the story their grandfather's story was, or the story Barbara Hutton's story was. It is not the story of a fortune lost. It is the story of 2 women who were treated, from the ages of 18 and 16, as public property, whose beauty, handbags, and dates were chronicled in every magazine in America, whose father humiliated their mother on the eve of the younger one's debutante ball, whose brother-in-law, through one short marriage, was the subject of an unsolved death on a Greek island, whose 3rd husband, in the elder sister's case, was an insider trader pardoned by a lame duck president. Every single element of that story, if you wrote it as fiction, would strike readers as overdetermined and implausible. None of the elements are invented. All of them are documented. And after all of it, the sisters were still standing. They were not rich little girls in hotel rooms at 93 with fortunes sewn into their nightgowns. They were not heroes on sinking ocean liners, giving away their life jackets. They were not Barbara Hutton, whittled down to 80 pounds in a Beverly Wilshire suite with $3,500 in her account. They were 2 women from Grosse Pointe, raised by nuns, who had been presented to society at the most expensive parties of their era, and who had somehow come out the other side as an etiquette author and a learning disabilities advocate. Nothing was lost. The whole point of the story, the reason it is not the Hutton story, or the Vanderbilt story, or the Ida Wood story, is that nothing was lost. The men came and the men went. The headlines came and the headlines went. And the Ford sisters, who had been told at 17 and 15 that they existed to marry well, survived everyone who had ever told them so. That, in the end, may be the most subversive thing two debutantes from Grosse Pointe ever did. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.